Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Ramón Rodríguez to talk all about his wonderful series, Will Trent. And one of the first things I was really interested in is I've heard you say that stepping into this character, that the voice and the tone of voice and how he sounded was kind of the way in for you, and that you
Hmm.
spent a lot of time thinking about the dialect and the accent and not just that specifically, but that even Andre 3000 was interesting for you to listen to, like the musicality and the tone of his voice, but also the idea that he grew up in this foster care home. So he would have had all these different influences around him. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit more about how that really fundamentally shaped this character for you at the beginning.
Yeah, that you did your homework. That is accurate. It was the first time for me. I've never had to do a Southern dialect, and so it was a choice that I thought early on was important, just because of where this character was raised, and so I wanted him to sound like the environment that he grew up in, which was the foster care system of Atlanta, and so. I was fortunate enough to find an incredible dialect coach. And like you mentioned, we sort of were finding references of sounds and people that might be good as an inspiration. And so Andre 3000 was definitely one that I used often. But it was really incredible. There's just something about how it sits in your mouth and even the pace and everything about it. It wasn't, it kind of became its own thing, which was kind of lovely in the process of putting Will together and trying to figure out who this guy is. And the voice was, yeah, it was an integral part of that process. In addition to sort of even the wardrobe became such a part of like his armor of putting on the three-piece suit, the vest, the jacket, the cufflinks. I've got a pair of shoes that are so beat up and destroyed, or Will does, that I adore because it just it's rough and it's old and it's leather and it's just got some texture and character that I feel like if you looked at his feet, you can kind of tell there's a story there. As opposed to if you looked up and you looked at his suit, you might go, oh, he's all put together. You look at his feet, you go, well, something's a little, and that kind of in a lot of ways is I think who this guy is. He presents something in a certain way, but he's hiding a lot of things, and there's a lot of things he may have been ashamed about that I think he actually has had some progress in this season with dealing with, for instance, his dyslexia. But the dialect was a wonderful entry that helped kind of shape a lot of things in terms of how someone would speak in that environment and what that sound and it helped build them in a real fundamental way, which was really fun.
And he has such a specific rhythm as a character in the way that he moves in the world and
Yeah.
the way that he speaks, and he likes things to be very compartmentalized and logical. And early on in
Right.
playing him, how did you find that rhythm in looking at both the writing on the page with the scripts, but then also just how you were feeling him out in those earliest scenes?
Yeah, it became pretty clear. We shot a scene early on, which was I'll never forget it because it was actually one of the big hooks for me in the pilot that really made me fall in love with him because beneath all of the awkwardness and the rigidness and the is a massive heart. And that heart was in this one particular scene where he adopted Betty. And that for me, it told me beneath all of this stoicism and this kind of thing that he's trying to portray is someone that's very vulnerable and yearning and longing for connection, particularly family because of how he grew up. And so that kind of became my anchor. I was like, okay, that's who this guy really is. But in that scene, there was a lot of awkwardness, which was really funny. There's a physical comedy aspect to it. And I think that's something we've gone back to a lot with Will is a bit of physical awkward comedy. So like pushing the Betty back and forth and the dog is disagreeing, walking away. So he's, in certain ways he can feel sort of robotic. And that's something that I kind of was feeling and discovering and exploring. Um, it's very liberating to play someone that is so different than me. And so it allows me to feel like I've got a freedom. It's like sometimes people say when you get to play a villain, you get to have fun because you get to play. And there's a lot of things, not that Will's a villain in any way, but there's just a freedom, even though it's interesting because he feels so put together and so compartmentalized, like you said. Um, it's funny that I feel like I can get away with a lot more in a way, and I can really go for things, and they might play better because he's typically a certain way. So you can start sort of testing out the limits of his rigidness, and it becomes fun to watch, I think.
And it's fun because he keeps trying to open himself up more and more, and there's a willingness to at least attempt. And what you just described about the roboticness, like I was thinking about the scene where he goes to hug the horse and he's literally making robot moves, or when he comes
Yeah.
back and goes to hug Nico and then kind of realizes like, oh, not quite yet, and he just,
Yeah. Or with Faith, he had that with Faith as well, where they kind of, both
yeah,
were, yeah. Yeah, it's fun. I think you want like, it breaks my heart, but it also warms my heart. But it's sort of he's someone that does struggle with that and physical affection, and again, because of the physical trauma, and we get to see different sides of him with different people. The way he is with Angie is not the way he is with Faith or Amanda, and so finding those softer moments, I think makes him feel whole. If you're watching him from afar on television, you kind of get to see the bigger picture, and maybe we root for him as someone who's an underdog and has had to overcome and has this resilient spirit that might help us go, yeah, we want to see this guy figure it out, maybe. But it's also kind of fun to watch him stumble along the way.
And it does feel like Angie very much has been the key relationship to opening up any of those little cracks of how he lets other people in. And so, how do you feel like that relationship and friendship has been so pivotal to the ways that he will kind of acquiesce little pieces here and there, even if he's not fully ready to step
Yeah.
fully into someone else's space in the way they want him to?
To watch the evolution of that relationship and be in it has been really fun to explore, where we meet them and we know and can feel that these two have a huge history together. They've been through a lot, and I feel like you get a real sense of this loyalty that they have towards each other because they know their deepest, darkest secrets, and they've been there for each other for so long. So that when that we get to the moment, a very pinnacle moment at the end of season two, when he has to arrest her, I think what that underscores is a thing that we've also shown to be true for Will, which is he's incredibly morally ethical and kind of straight, and he has to feel to do the right thing. I think that comes from a place of maybe feeling that things were not done right for him, as a kid and in the foster care system, and not having people show up for him. And so he feels he has to do what's right. And so from that to their sort of breakup and watching them in season three, really kind of, it's a tumultuous relationship. They're not really getting along. To then eventually, the death of Marco when that young 14-year-old boy dies in his arms, which is so traumatic and tragic, and heartbreaking to see how she shows up for him as a friend. And then to see him show up for her when she drops the largest bomb I think he could have ever imagined, which is that she's pregnant and that it's not his kid. And again, this is someone that's longing for family. And so, and then for him not to just turn and walk away, he's chooses to be there. And so we'll see what that ends up becoming. But I think it says a lot about him and this relationship that he didn't just walk away and abandon it. And despite it being a real heartbreaking moment for him.
And with what you brought up about that pivotal scene at the end of season two, where he had to be the one to arrest her and take her in, we meet him at the beginning of this season where everything's just completely stripped away and he's had to leave everything behind because he can't actually face himself and the people closest to him. And what was that experience in taking this character and really just stripping away some of the aspects, but then finding that fundamentally he's still the same person? He can't actually escape. He's still there, trying to investigate details and things around him.
It's something as artists, as actors, as writers, as creators, it's like we always want to try to find ways to make this feel fresh, right? And exciting. And how can we do something new? And so when we were first talking about season three, after knowing what he went through at the end of season two, we thought it was, for me at least, it was really exciting for him to not look or kind of feel like himself. And so the beard and the curly hair and not in the three-piece suit like we usually see him, and it's just him and Betty in Tennessee, was really fun and exciting to have that for the first couple episodes. I mean, I love this so much because I have to shave every day for the show. I'm like, we might have to go revisit that more in season four because it's just I like the relaxed version of him. And what was great was we got to see some evolution in this character. He was someone that lived with a lot of shame. For instance, his dyslexia. So then to see him in season three with a phone and an app, Eduardo, that speaks to him and helps him with his dyslexia that he got from his uncle Antonio, played by John Ortiz in season two. He planted that seed of like, oh, you're dyslexic, and look at you using this device to help you um, work through the world. And where I think Will often would have never been open to that, he really got open by that experience. It was great to see him not be so ashamed and talk about it more, where he never did. And I always love it when it's tied to something personal for him, which was the Spanish. Eduardo speaks Spanish, which then ties back to his mother, Lucy. So watching that kind of evolution and always trying to find new ways, it was exciting. I got to direct that premiere episode, which was so fun and wonderful. And so it was a refreshing moment, and we've been able to, I think, do that on multiple occasions this season, and hopefully we'll continue doing that. But again, from like there's certain episodes that really stand out for me, and the Marco death episode was so beautifully written and so powerful. But to go from something so heavy to then the hallucination episode, which is only 2 episodes after, but meanwhile, we kind of explored Will's vulnerability and having to potentially even maybe seemingly join this cult that was happening during episode, 12 and into 13, which then led to the crazy hallucination trip dance sequence. But it's just, for me, it's so bold again and exciting and refreshing. I mean, when we got those scripts, you can see the whole set just talking about them and being really excited about, okay, how do we figure this out? How do we crack this episode? So we're always trying to find ways to keep it fresh and bold, but I'm proud that our show happens to be able to really juggle some heaviness and some levity equally. And that puts a lot of pressure on not only the writers, but the cast to be able to juggle that. And we have a cast that is nimble and talented enough to be able to do that.
And with the fact that you directed the first episode of this season, what was that experience of what you found to be really important in the visual language of this show? Because it's the first episode that you've directed in the show, but also you know that world so well from living in it for 2 seasons already.
Yeah, I mean, I had an advantage having 2 seasons under my belt, really knowing the show, really knowing our strengths. One of the sort of motifs and things that I really liked about that I wanted to try to achieve with our DP Fernando for that episode was this idea of mystery because we didn't know where Will was. And so if you may have noticed or not, but if you were to watch it, you'll see like I don't show Will immediately. I wanted to show the pieces of Will, the tape recorder, the handkerchief, the phone. We see Betty, we see him sort of his daily routine of working out, and then eventually we reveal, and he looks very different. We did a very similar thing in that episode, which was absolutely intentional, with when we introduced the character of Raphael, this, Will's childhood friend who sort of is now involved in a potential murder of a cop. Where we just sort of showed his jewelry, the hand, his mouth, these details, and then eventually revealed the character. And so that was a lot of fun sort of coming up with and during prep and really thinking about it once we had the script. I wanted to put my print on it, and really try to make it my own along with the whole team. I mean, I know this crew so well. We've been together for a while, but to be able to collaborate with them at that level and on that level, during prep, I got to know some of them more than usually on set I'm in my own head and zone doing my thing, but I got to really hang with them during prep on these long van rides to locations as we're scouting and just had a lot of great, not only just creative talk, but just personal talk. And so I'm really proud of it. I think, also that fight sequence I loved because it was a way to show history between these two where it could be fun, violent, but also show that they have a past together. So there was a lot of really great highlights, and then obviously being in post, which and submitting my director's cut was really fantastic. And the music, I love the music on our show, and it's a big part of I think our world. We have a lot of conversations about the music, and oftentimes it might be sort of throwback 70s pieces because we do feel the show has a kind of 70s vibe to it. So
And because preparation is something that's so key for you in so many aspects, with the way that you film the show, where you'll be filming an episode for about 9 days, but that last day you're finishing that episode and then starting with, the next director on the next episode. How do you kind of step into the preparation of all the different scenes in each episode when it really does just flow completely straight into the next one in that way?
As an actor, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think not many people will understand what it is to be a lead of a show with that schedule in television, particularly broadcast television. It's really pretty hectic. As you said, you mentioned the day that's called the double up day, which is you're ending one episode and on that same day you're beginning a new episode or the next one. And so there's not a lot of time. In addition, and I'm grateful for this. I'm an EP on the show, but it's not a vanity title for me. So I'm very much involved and I want to be involved and I'm grateful I get to be involved and we've earned this relationship of trust where we get to collaborate together. And so time is limited, where I'm giving notes on scripts and director cuts and casting ideas and music and um but I wouldn't want it any other way. It's really fantastic. But so there's not a lot of time in terms of like prepping material and it's but I do have it's great. I have weekly calls. We do weekly calls with our showrunners. I chat with them and we sort of do recaps and what's coming up and as we talk about notes and all that stuff.
And with your work as an executive producer and with how closely you work with the showrunners and the writing team, I wanted to ask about that in regards to the last couple of episodes this season, because it feels like there's such big elements in terms of what's actually happening and the case that they're investigating and the aspects of all of that. And yet at the same time, it's so driven by all of these characters. And that really is the central piece to it all. And I was interested in a lot of the conversations that went into making sure that was the case.
Yeah, we wanted to find something that felt big as we got towards the end on a personal level, but also on a case level, sort of what's happening. And so, this sort of domestic terrorist group, the Founders Front, that, felt like this could be something that how can we place the city of Atlanta in danger? Not only that, how can we kind of pull away the people that are closest to Will that that his he's always yearning for that connection for family. And so to be able to sort of start pulling and tugging at those was in a real interesting concept. And so, we got to see well, and there were so many bombs that we dropped. We dropped the introduction of Will's father, played by Yul Vasquez, and he was Sheriff Caleb Broussard. That was huge, obviously, for us. And so that was something that I remember we were talking about as we were getting about the midpoint of the season, like what could some big bombs be and some things to really explore. And Will's father was something that seemed to be really interesting and exciting. In addition to, by the way, Angie's mother, who we'd never seen, but we had heard about. And so exploring that story for her and watching all of that culminating while we also learn that Angie's pregnant. She's having a baby with Seth, and it's obviously not Will's. And it was a great sort of like, okay, Will finds a piece of a puzzle of his life. Okay, Will loses a piece of a potentially, and so that kind of back and forth and that tug of war about things going one way and then not is something that we think seems to be working. And we left a lot of open-ended, cliffhangers with regards to obviously Will and Angie, obviously with Amanda, who's again another sort of family figure. You can almost consider a maternal figure in Will's life. We don't know where that's going to end up. We don't know what's happening with Ormwood and his tumor, which seems to be in a bad place at the end of the season. So, and then there's so many other things still to explore, but that seemed to be, it's a big episode. It's huge. And it was a lot of fun.
You mentioned Amanda and the fact that obviously she is a mother figure to him in his life. And right at the end of the finale, she's unconscious and he doesn't know if she's going to make it. And he says all the things that always remain unspoken, but are constantly felt between the two of them. And
Yeah.
what was the experience that you found stepping into that moment and getting to really see him express himself in a way that we don't typically get to see or hear from him?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It was really a moment. They don't speak to each other that way, Will and Amanda. It's always sort of tough love and very reserved and held close to the chest. And so in this moment, I think again, he was pretty vulnerable, getting the news about Will and her baby, and that last moment as he's leaving the hospital and he turns back and looks at her and Seth, and it's like what could have been, and that's just not his reality. And he goes to this last sort of refuge, which is, and I think in real moment of desperation and hope that he just can't lose her as well. He's had it was a rough season for Will. It just was. I mean, there was some up moments, and we had Gina Rodriguez come in as Marion Alba and a refreshing, healthy, but love interest for a moment. But sadly, because of what happened with Marco, that died in his arms, the 14-year-old boy, he just couldn't process and could not find a way to sort of move forward in this personal relationship. So it was a moving moment, that last scene. And what was really great is we really wanted to underscore. So the three last scenes are Will and Angie in the hospital, followed by Ormond and Faith at the house, and then the last moment of Will and Amanda at the hospital. And we wanted to find a song to help really sort of drive that through. And we landed on a great song by The National that I love, and just thought it really, even what the words of the song are saying, it's pretty moving.
There's also so much an aspect of a character like Will that he very much always does things in his way. And, people will sometimes ask him to do things differently or criticize it, but he's always going to be him at the end of the day. But yet he will adjust little things for the people that he cares about enough. And I was interested in what were some of like those slight gradual shifts or changes where he's a little bit more willing to do things according to the people around him that are important to him, because that's kind of one of the ways that he expresses himself with being someone who doesn't say it out loud.
I mean, I'll tell you at least one that comes to mind. It's more personal, which I think was a an evolution in this character. Was he carried around a lot of shame, like I'd mentioned, and so the Eduardo app was a big thing of him taking ownership. Like, this is it. I'm dyslexic. He hit it since the pilot episode. That pilot episode, I remember he had a whole moment where he just went so calling himself trash. And so, I think that ownership, taking that on and seeing him and that connection again to his mom, because Eduardo speaks Spanish. I'm trying to think what other moments has Will. Can you think of any? I feel like you know this show well, and what are some things that he's done for others?
I feel like even just the way that he'll be willing to kind of communicate little things, because in season one, he was very much, I'm just going to go off and figure out this case by myself. And now he's at least willing to collaborate a little bit more in different ways.
This is true. This is true. Yeah, I mean that relationship, even with him and Faith, has come a long ways. Even though we really tested it this season, the whole Jeremy storyline, him keeping. Although again, here's another moment where I'm like, this character continues to live his truth. He's not going to break the law. And so he gets Jeremy out of a situation, but he's not, and so he uses him again, turns him and makes him his criminal informant, but he obviously withholds it from Faith, and so that put a real wedge in that relationship. And we got by the end of the season, it seems like they're in a much better place. But that relationship, yeah, because he was a solo guy. He's not comfortable working with others. Um, I think, watching him seeing him attempt to have a relationship with Gina's character was huge. And I think it was really good and it was working well. I think he just had a huge setback with the loss of Marco. I just think he couldn't forgive himself in no shape, way, or form. It's just something that took him way, way down. Well, here's another thing. Again, this is more personal, but we've never seen Will attempt to address some of his issues by going to get help. And so the therapy scenes, which I loved, I mean, the first therapy scene I thought was just so fun because he kind of chewed out that first therapist, threw back all the basic stuff he was throwing at him. He was like, please, what is this, child's play? And then he meets this other therapist, and she seemed to sort of inspire some new perspectives. I'd be curious in a season four where if there's anything there more to uncover and explore when you see someone sort of begin the process of looking inward. Because I don't think he's someone that's done that too much in terms of trying to get help and trying to move forward and trying to um, address some of his trauma.
Yeah. Well, I really, really enjoyed this season so much, as always. So thank you so much, Ramon. Appreciate you talking about it.
Thank you so much. I can tell you love the show and it means a lot, just the way you speak about it. So thank you so much, Mara.
Thank you.